Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Mediwake, and I'm here with Lindsey Deluce and Kelsey McEwen. Welcome to CTV Your Morning, the podcast.
This week, we're taking a look at the growing role of the private sector in space exploration and how the space program could be impacted by President Trump's second term in office.
And turning tragedy into hope. We talk with sports broadcaster Scott Oake about his family's journey with addiction and his moving memoir about his son, Bruce.
Thanks for joining us today. All right, today we want to start with social media, and you've likely heard the accusations of political bias that are being leveled against Mark Zuckerberg and Meta.
Yeah, Democratic-related hashtags were hidden on the Instagram app after U.S. President Donald Trump's inauguration.
Meta said it was working to fix an issue affecting people's ability to search for a number of different hashtags. Tech analyst Carmi Levy helps us get to the bottom of this situation.
What happened? What do we know?
Well, it looks like if you are in a Meta platform, so Facebook, Instagram, Threads as well, and you searched for the Democrat hashtag and a number of others, for example, the left or DNC, you would receive an error message saying that it just wasn't available, could not find them, and apparently we've seen a number of others that are sort of essentially being suppressed by the algorithm. You literally cannot find them if you search for them on the platform. At the same time, hashtags related to the Republican Party seem to be getting amplified. There are a lot of people who don't even follow Republican resources on these platforms, and they say their feeds are filled with that content as well. So something's definitely going on with the algorithm. The company says it's not deliberate, that it's an issue. They're working on it to correct it, but it almost seems somewhat coincidental given the timing, the proximity to the inauguration and the new administration.
Yeah, I want to get to that proximity both literally and figuratively in just a moment, but I want to ask you first about something that at least popped up on my feed last night, which is that Facebook and Instagram users were surprised to find out that they had opted in to follow the accounts of U.S. President Donald Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, and Vice President J.D. Vance. So clear up for us what has happened here.
Yeah, that's another weird one, because normally you follow who you follow and you don't follow who you don't want to follow. And apparently automatic ads are not really a thing. The company says that it's part of the presidential transition process. Some accounts, for example, like White House and POTUS, they're managed. In other words, they close out and archive the content from the previous administration and then move everything over to the new administration. And in some cases, that could involve shifting who follows those accounts. It seems like a pretty lame excuse from the company, because essentially that's still within the control of the user. I really don't want anyone going into my account telling me who I should or should not be following. So again, it looks like the company is playing with the back end a little bit, doing things that are a little bit kind of over the line, getting caught, and using issues as an excuse.
This is important, not just because, it's irritating for people who may or may not want to follow certain people. It also has to do with information and the extending of information. So if those are platforms that are being used to share messaging, policy, and you do or don't want to follow them and you have to opt out of it, that's an issue. And when we're talking about information, misinformation, disinformation, and actual information, the venue, the medium that goes through is an important part of this conversation. Also important is who runs these companies. And the heads of Amazon, Google, TikTok all attended the inauguration. We saw them sitting behind the family. The tech sector appears to be very cozy with the new president. Some people finding out that some of the politicians weren't allowed to bring their wives, but the tech CEOs were allowed to bring their spouses. What are your biggest concerns when you look at the proximity of these relationships, both literally and figuratively?
It's incredibly concerning, because the platforms that we use for civic community engagement, namely social media, which we thought were social media, we determine what that engagement looks like. Increasingly, they're being driven by algorithms. We see what we see because what the software tells us to see. And increasingly, the companies, not wanting to be put on blast by Donald Trump during his administration, are shifting their policies toward those aligned with the new administration. And so they don't want to be on the wrong side of it. This is about maximizing profit and growth and engagement, and not being Donald Trump's enemy, being his friend. And so the worry is that if you think you're using social media as an unbiased platform to just find out about the world. That is absolutely not the case. You are now increasingly being fed, thanks to software, what the owners of these companies, who are very clearly politically motivated, want you to see. So there's a bias there, whether we like it or not. And if we go into it with our eyes closed, that's a problem for overall civic engagement.
Yeah, in the case of Instagram, anyway, it's one thing to have suggested users. It's another thing to have users added. Five years ago this week, China's government ordered a lockdown in Wuhan to stop the spread of what we now refer to as COVID-19. It was one of the first and one of the harshest lockdowns in the world. 11 million people ordered not to leave their homes. There were police checkpoints, food deliveries, and something we would all eventually see, city streets empty and life on hold. The lockdown in Wuhan lasted until April of 2020.
That was wild. I remember that. Do you remember that, when we didn't really know what was going on, and we'd go to these shots of Wuhan and be like, look at what's happening there, which felt like a world away at the time.
Well, and remember, it almost felt like an overcorrection. Like, I remember laughing. I think you showed us on Sidebar. I remember laughing at the quadrant elevator, and only two people were allowed at a time. And then we had that here in our elevator months later.
No idea what was coming.
No.
We really didn't. Do you remember that feeling?
Yeah, I remember sitting in the car driving home from work, and my husband called me and said, listen, my brother and his wife and family are planning a trip to Disney World. They're supposed to go in 2 weeks. Do you think it's safe? And I'll never forget that feeling of him asking me something and feeling almost like we were over-exaggerating, like we were being ridiculous. And then all of a sudden, 3 months after that question, I was like, how could he have possibly asked? Of course it was unsafe. Like, of course we can't travel. And then all of a sudden now, to be sitting here 5 years later, and life has gone back to normal. My kids don't remember. That's the weirdest thing.
Any of them?
No, they all remember being together a lot. The boys are best friends, and I think it's because they only had each other for so long, but they don't remember that we couldn't go to grocery stores. They don't really remember wearing masks. They don't remember the obsessive hand washing.
Wow.
And I'm thankful. I'm really thankful they don't remember that, because I still feel the second we all get that little tickle in our throat, which is all the time, I feel a heightened sense of anxiety from that, which I think a lot of people do.
You know, Lindsey, I remember you asking an important question in one of our news meetings, because at the time it was something coronavirus, something. And I remember you saying, when are we shortening it? Because we know that happened with SARS, and it's happened with,
And I shorten everything.
And you shorten anything. And then eventually it became, as COVID-19 or just COVID. But just all of the things that we didn't know that were coming. And now we're at almost 5 years.
That blows my mind, because, we talk a lot about 2020. We remember those couple months, like the moments that things started to trickle in, the facts, the number of cases. Remember we used to report the daily cases, number of cases every single day. Do you remember that?
Starting the newscast.
That was exactly, and actually for months and months and months, the only story in our newscast
was COVID.
Was COVID. That was it.
That's what I was just going to say, that I remember having a meeting on the phone with you guys when we were all in our respective individual spaces. I was home, I was pregnant, and we didn't know how pregnancy was going to be impacted by COVID, so I left the studio really early. And I remember us commenting as a team, when in the history of any of us in journalism has one story dominated the newscast like this?
It was every story.
Do you know the last thing this is kind of funny that I will say is, I remember we had a meeting and we were having a brainstorming meeting, and we're talking about, what if we could show everybody in Canada what your lives are like at home? And we got a whole list of reasons why that wouldn't, this is before COVID. And we were like, oh, it couldn't happen for X, Y, Z. Fast forward, it happened. Anyway, amazing to look back.
Amazing.
We are giving you a glimpse into what it looks like to struggle with addiction, and what it feels like for family members who are desperately trying to help. It comes to us from sports broadcaster Scott Oake and his new memoir, For the Love of a Son. That son is Bruce Oake, Scott's eldest, who cycled through active addiction, recovery, and relapse before overdosing when he was 25 years old. In their grief, Scott and his wife Anne created a recovery center in Bruce's name. And Scott is joining us from Winnipeg this morning with more on his family's very personal story, what it's been like to turn a parent's worst nightmare into hope for so many others. It's our honor to talk to you today, Scott. Listen, I spent most of the afternoon reading through your book, and I would challenge anyone to make it through the pages without it tugging at your heart and shedding a tear. The book is so honest, and it's the struggle of the parents that really sits with me the most, the struggle to save your son. I want to start, first of all, with the kind of person that Bruce was before addiction took hold. You describe him as an athletic teenager, good looking, he loved boxing, he loved to rap. What was he like personality-wise?
Well, Bruce had everything. I would say he got the best of Anne and I. He was a precocious child, started speaking in complete sentences around the age of 2.5, and I don't recall he ever shut up after that. Very gifted child in a lot of ways. You know, our son Darcy is a gifted international illusionist, and Bruce was just as talented in a lot of other areas. We would look at Bruce like any parent would look at a child and think, man, this kid's got it all, and he could be anything. But the truth is, addiction does not discriminate. It can come for anyone at any time, and it came for him.
When did you and Anne first realize that Bruce was in trouble, that his drug use had tipped past smoking an occasional joint into what would become a heroin addiction? Because you and your wife, Anne, you were not sticking your heads in the sand. You were very well aware. You had spoken to him multiple times about the dangers of drugs.
We always had our suspicions, but we didn't know a great deal about the signs of drug use. And so we had said to Bruce consistently for a couple of years, if there's a problem here, let us know, and we'll do whatever we can to help you. But we got a graphic, reveal of the situation he was in his late teens. We had been in Nova Scotia celebrating my mother's 75th anniversary or birthday, pardon me. And Darcy called to say Bruce had been assaulted. This is all in the book, so I won't go into a lot of detail because I want people to buy the book. But anyway, we were 3,000 miles away, and there wasn't much we could do. When we got home, Darcy brought Bruce home. We hadn't seen him for a couple of weeks, and there he stood in the full regalia of someone with an addiction problem, and that started the journey that ended probably, well, it was 19, so 6 years later. And it had become pretty quickly a cycle of, as you just mentioned, active addiction, recovery, relapse.
Yeah, in fact, Bruce went into rehab 4 times, in and out of detox 8 times, which for anybody who doesn't know, you have to detox before you're allowed to enter rehab. So he was in that cycle. How did you navigate it as parents? It made me think of, there's that saying, and I'm paraphrasing, but you're only as happy as your saddest child.
Right. That was actually one of my wife's favorite expressions. You're only as happy as your unhappiest child. And Bruce didn't want that life for sure. And we did everything we could to help him. But how we got through it was that we had a gift as a couple. Anne was the perfect partner for me. And we never argued over anything to do with Bruce, over what we should do to help him. We were always in accord. So there was none of this. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't given him that $500, or this happened because of you, or whatever. We always agreed on what we should do to try to help Bruce. Because if you don't have that agreement, addiction can tear families apart. We were fortunate it didn't tear us apart. In fact, it probably brought us closer together. There's
a really poignant part in the book, Scott, that you talk about how you and your wife would remind yourselves, no matter how difficult it got, it was always so much harder for Bruce. And your other son, Darcy, used to talk about how addiction is the only disease, I love this line, that you can get yelled at for having. He said it was like standing over a cancer patient and shouting, "What are you doing with cancer? Just get rid of it." And it really speaks to the nature of addiction and mindset. Can you expand on that and the fact that addiction is a disease, but we don't often see it that way?
Well, first of all, the phrase addiction is the only disease you get yelled at for having comes from the late great comedian Mitch Hedberg. That's who Darcy's quoting when he says that. I would hope that the message in this book, at least one of the messages that people get, is that addiction is a disease. It's most often defined as a chronic brain disorder, and it shouldn't be hard to see it that way. Just ask yourself this question. Why would a mother choose vodka over her children? If her brain was wired correctly, she almost certainly would not. A chronic brain disorder, I think, accurately describes addiction. Bruce had it. It was a disease. When we wrote his obituary, we were resolute in our belief that there was no shame in what had claimed his life because it was a disease. And so the first line of Bruce's obituary reads, "Tragically, Bruce Oak lost his battle with addiction at the tender age of 25." And that really was the genesis of the grandiose project that's become the Bruce Oak Recovery Center and will apply to the Anne Oak Family Recovery Center, a project that's now underway.
I want to ask you about the Recovery Center because and again, I don't want to give too much away because there's so many great things in the book, but I want to ask you, so this is a shot of it here. It's a beautiful facility, but something that just stood out to me was the jerseys that hang from the ceiling. I think it's an incredible moment. You describe it in the book. Can you explain to everybody what the significance is of hanging the jerseys from the ceiling? There they are, with the number 1.
Yeah. Well, the number 1 stands for 1 year of sobriety, and that picture was taken probably a year ago or maybe longer. There are 110 jet sweaters that hang in our gymnasium now. We've become essentially victims of our own success because we're down to 1 girder. But I don't know how we're going to figure this out, but we will. But in any case, participants upon gaining 1 year of sobriety, and that's a landmark in recovery, get a jet sweater. There are 110 hanging, or pardon me, 120 now hanging in the Bruce Oak Gymnasium. Each of them, as I say, standing for 1 year of sobriety. So the plan is when a participant gets to 5 years, that sweater with the 1 on it will come down, and one with 5 will go up on it. Those sweaters are valued; they're treasured. You often hear participants talk about, I can't wait till I get my jet sweater. I get it next month. They get it on what's called birthday nights, the last Wednesday of every month. And if someone has reached 1 year of sobriety, that's when they get the jet sweater. Their families come. The participant speaks about how his life has changed. It's very, very touching. I would say this, the jet sweaters that hang in the gymnasium of the Bruce Oak Recovery Center mean more than they do to the players who wear them in NHL games, because many of those sweaters are the difference between life and death.
Scott Oak, I want to thank you, first of all, for this conversation today. The book is incredible. A reminder, it is called For the Love of a Son, a memoir of addiction, loss, and hope. Thank you for sharing all of those with us today, Scott.
Thanks for having me on, Anne-Marie. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
We are highlighting an organization supporting young people and their mental health. We've got Carling Luciani, who's with Jack.org, joining me this morning to tell me about this incredible organization and the work you're doing. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So you work with young people. What kind of mental health challenges are you seeing that they're facing?
I mean, you have to look at the statistics. Most mental health issues start before the age of 24. Suicide is still a leading cause for death for young people in Canada, and 57% of youth who are in Canada that are struggling are not getting the help that they need. So being a part of Jack.org, a mental health organization, we're really trying to focus on the prevention approach before it gets to crisis for youth.
I think about some of the barriers that young people face when it comes to accessing care, financial cost of mental health care. Maybe they don't have access to insurance, maybe they don't have full-time work. How does Jack.org provide support there?
Absolutely. So Jack.org really focuses on providing care sooner for youth before it gets to a point of crisis. So we do this through many different initiatives, one of them being Jack Talks, which are mental health presentations by youth for youth, which are really giving youth the opportunity to better understand and manage their mental health, in addition to learning how to support their peers, seek professional support, and advocate for change as well.
What kind of impact does that have to have a young person having one of their peers, someone their age, talk to them about what they're going through?
It has such a profound impact because with the peer-to-peer approach, you know, youth are the best advocates for well-being and mental health because they've been through all of these challenges that their peers are facing. So being able to, for myself, be a Jack Talk speaker for the past 8 years, seeing the direct impact we're making has been so meaningful.
Carling, if someone's watching right now and they're struggling, what would you say to them?
I would say to them that they deserve the help just as much as anyone else. If they're thinking about seeking help, you know, your mental health, there's up and downs throughout your life. And whether you're feeling distressed or down, it's really important to know that there is help out there and you deserve it, and no one should go through their mental health journey alone.
Thank you for sharing that. Someone once said to me, you are a person worth working on.
Absolutely.
And that was the catalyst for me to see the help when I needed it. So Carling, thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad that you've joined us today for Your Morning, the podcast. And you can join us live every weekday, Monday on CTV CTV News Channel and on your CTV News app.
Now, concerns about possible U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods is sending the loonie in a tailspin.
Yeah, from hitting a 4-year low against the American dollar to bouncing back after U.S. President Trump held off on a tariff threat on his first day in office. So the big question now is, what happens next?
Financial commentator Patty Lovett-Reed takes a closer look at what this could mean for your wallet.
Let's talk about our loonie. How much of a hit could it take if Trump does, in fact, move ahead with tariffs starting Feb 1st?
You know, tariffs are the wild card, and there's no question about it. Last I looked, the looney's trading at 69.10. So if 25% tariffs go through on February 1st, and let's say we don't retaliate, we could see the Bank of Canada cut rates, maybe 25, 50 basis points. But what that means is there's less demand, we have a slowing economy, unemployment, and falling inflation. So if that doesn't happen, what we could see, and it could help the dollar, is if we retaliate to the tune of about $150 billion worth of goods coming from the US into Canada. Because what that will do is it's almost like a double taxation on us. So rates would likely, believe it or not, maybe have to go higher. The cost of goods go up, unemployment ticks higher, the economy slows. And so to say this is a wild card, yeah, it really is. And the Bank of Canada's got to be watching it very closely.
Patty, I want to remind people of something that is still happening that they probably forgot about, given all the political upheaval that we've had in the last month or two. And that is that February is when Ottawa's GST break ends. Remember that old thing? That break helped.
Yeah.
That's right. It helped to keep...
And that's what helped inflation.
That's right. So how concerned are you about those numbers ticking up again?
Yeah, I think it was very temporary. I do think they could tick higher. I do think households are responding accordingly. I read a survey just recently by the Bank of Montreal that 60% roughly feel we are still headed towards a recession. Costs are still high. Intentional spending by many. They're looking at their needs and wants, and they may alter their buying patterns. So all of that, of course, could lead to an economic slowdown. And so this is definitely a period of uncertainty. We can't control what happens with tariffs, but we can in our households control how we respond. And I think a lot of households are looking at that.
Oh, Patty, that is such great advice, because I think a lot of times right now people feel a bit out of control. Good reminder of what we can control. Listen, you brought up the R word. A new report by the Bank of Montreal found more than 60% of Canadians are concerned about the potential for a recession. So how grounded are those fears?
I think they're relatively grounded. I often tell people now is a great time to sort of sit back and say, okay, I'm going to be razor sharp. And you know, I'm going to say it, Anne-Marie, on my numbers. I need to know where I stand. I need to know what my options are, where my money's coming from. I need to know where I can cut back in my household. I also need to explore ways right now. I see a lot of people saying, I'm selling stuff. I may ask for a raise if it's warranted. I'm picking up a side hustle. But let's not lose sight. We don't want to lock down and not do anything. There are great opportunities. Yes, there are challenges, but when there are challenges, it's surprising how other things can transform themselves into new experiences for you. So I think this is still an opportunity to move forward, albeit with a little bit of caution.
Up next, award-winning author David A. Robertson is back. He's got a new book. This memoir is called All the Little Monsters.
It's all about his journey with mental health and how he's learning to live with anxiety.
The interesting part is about the title and where he got the term little monsters.
I had a therapist many years ago that used this analogy of this kind of monster on your shoulder that whispers into your ear and tells you all the things that you can't do or all the things that you're not worth. And whether you listen to it or not, helps it to grow or to shrink. It never really gets rid of it, but the more you listen to it, the heavier it becomes. Eventually it starts crushing down on you. And then when you're able to hear it but do the things anyway that it says you can't, it becomes this smaller little thing that you can carry. And I think that's the thing, is being able to carry it in a better way.
Yeah, I really loved what he said there. We've all had conversations with people in their journeys, different places in mental health, and about how much power and energy you give something determines how much of your life it takes over. And so that idea of keeping a monster little by not allowing it to have a big voice, I thought was really neat.
There's so many applicable uses of that, too. I think as a parent, talking to my kids, I use something similar. We say, are you feeding that emotion? Are you feeding your anger? Are you feeding that story? Are you feeding that narrative? Is it real, or is it the story you're telling yourself that is real? And then are you feeding it? And then thinking of your mind like a garden. What you plant, what you feed, what you nurture is what grows. So if you nurture those weeds, they take right over. And if you nurture the other things in your life that you want to, that's what grows and that's what flourishes. Hearing it from his perspective, immediately it's such a tangible experience.
Totally. What I also thought was really interesting and poignant about this interview, David talks about, he has this great analogy when it comes to stairs. He talks about how he deals with anxiety when it stirs up.
So, you know, I put this list of things I'd like to overcome in my own life, and one of them is stairs. Like, for me, I have a heart condition, so when I exert myself too much, I have this skipped heartbeat. When I'm anxious, ironically, it also amps it up a little bit. So I see a large flight of stairs, and there's always this internal conflict that's like, well, there's an elevator there.
Yeah.
There are stairs here. So if I take the elevator, I can avoid it. But avoidance welcomes more anxiety. And so there's always a decision of, well, do I take the brave route? It sounds silly, but do I take this flight of stairs, or do I get in the elevator and I go up and I kind of skip it? And so oftentimes lately I've found that I've taken the stairs. And I think that's a good analogy for anybody with struggles that they have. Maybe it's best to take the stairs.
I love that. Sarah Polley, when she wrote her book called Run Towards the Danger, it also came out of a therapy session where your instinct is to avoid or to move away from the danger. And the empowerment it gives you to run towards the danger, because as you get closer, you realize how much smaller that feeling actually is.
We learned this the hard way with one of our children who struggles with anxiety. And we thought that as parents, we were doing the right thing by removing this child in our life from what she perceived to be like a dangerous situation or a very stressful situation. And so we were taking her out of all of these environments where we were told, once we did, a lot of therapy with ourselves, to sort of figure out ways and tools to help her, that we were told, no, you have to stop removing her. That is actually the opposite. You're having the opposite impact, where she's not facing that fear. She's not facing that anxiety. And when you don't face it, as he was talking about, head on, you don't learn the tools to sort of navigate that land that feels a bit scary and quite anxious. And I have to say, working with her over the years, with our daughter, and seeing the progress she's made by putting herself, and she's doing it now, putting herself in uncomfortable positions, and she knows that it's not as terrible as it is. Once you start to practice that muscle, and she's able to overcome so much more, and we're so proud of her. But it's that exercise that, honestly, I just didn't know about, Drew didn't know about, and we learned through, talking to therapists.
Well, and you realize when you start doing this, when you start building that muscle, that you got to build it with those stairs. You can't go into a dangerous situation and expect you to be able to perform and have all this bravery if you haven't, in the very safe situations where there's only a little bit of scary, tried to be brave. And you need to build it slowly but surely. And then when you do, Linz, to your point, to see the pride on your face.
Oh, it's so great.
I want to cry because you're so proud. And that's awesome to see.
A technique we've used with our kids, or I've used in my own life, is to ask yourself, how am I going to feel 10 minutes after I do this? Because you get so consumed with how it feels right now, but you don't even have to think through it, but how am I going to feel 10 minutes after I do it? It immediately brings your body temperature, everything down.
And that's so true. And oftentimes, and I have this in my own life too, it is the lead up. Right? It's not
all the anticipation.
It's not the actual action of, right? It's not when you're in it. It's the thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and sort of like stewing in that becomes all consuming, I think, for a lot of us.
Well, listen, proud of you, proud of your daughter, proud of everyone who's taking that moment to be brave today. So find your moment and be brave.
Face it.
Let's talk the modern day space race. It is obviously heating up. We've got private companies, including SpaceX and Blue Origin. They're leading the charge.
Yeah, from moon missions to plans for Mars, which we heard on Inauguration Day, they are really pushing the boundaries of what is possible when we're talking about space.
CTV science and technology specialist Dan Riskin now on what's fueling this cosmic competition.
Well, I think this is finally, we're seeing Blue Origin sort of step into the space race, right? There's been all this talk. Functionally, Jeff Bezos has been going as hard at this from the beginning as Elon Musk, but Elon Musk keeps having these successes, keeps getting rockets in the air, keeps accomplishing the goals. And Blue Origin just hasn't gotten off the ground. They've switched CEOs 3 times, and they're just trying to find a way to make it work. And so New Glenn having successful launch, is a great step in the right direction, especially it just happened to happen on a week where Elon Musk had one of his rockets explode over the Caribbean. So it really shows that there are now two players in the game, and I think that's good if we're relying on the competition piece of it to move the space race forward. Instead of having just one player who gets to have all the fun, having multiple companies that are in competition and pushing each other is going to make the space race go better.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Elon Musk. We know he donated $250 million to Trump's campaign during the election, while Bezos prevented the Washington Post from publishing their endorsement of any candidate. So how are you reacting to the relationship now between private space sector and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big can of worms. The real issue is that those are media moguls, right? I mean, Bezos owns the Washington Post, and Elon Musk, of course, runs Twitter. And so that's where a lot of people get their news. And the fact that they are very much aligned with Trump and his campaign has all kinds of implications for the freedom of the press and for freedom of information and how information moves to people. But in terms of the space race, I think it's actually quite interesting. There are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about it, and there are other reasons to be a little bit nervous. Optimism because you've got a president who's got the ear of the space people. They want to push space forward. He's made that part of his presidency. He knows that resonates well with his base. And so, creating a Space Force was one of the great accomplishments of his last time in office. And he would like to see accomplishments on the space front. And so I think we can be optimistic we're going to see progress. But the thing that gives me pause is that sometimes the things that are most dramatic and will get the base fired up and has Elon Musk jumping up and down, those aren't the things that the scientists need most. And so, a robot going to a faraway planet isn't going to get the same kinds of eyeballs as, talking about going back to Mars with people. And even though going to Saturn or going to Jupiter with a robot is going to be more feasible and it's going to get more data, it might not play to Donald Trump through those sort of megaphones of the billionaires the way other ones have. And so I'm worried about how NASA's overall mission is going to change.
NASA, I've had this conversation a couple of times, that NASA has needed to rely on the private sector and SpaceX more than ever as it contracts a larger share of its work out to other companies. Listen, let them pay for it rather than, trying to drop the money from taxpayers in America. What will NASA's role in future space missions look like? Like, will they get less and less of that pie?
Well, yeah, it's a very interesting question. So Trump has announced that Jared Isaacman, who was the private billionaire who went to space not too long ago. We were talking about that when it happened live. He did it the first spacewalk by a non-government private citizen. And so we've got somebody who's very much wrapped into the space race, but from that private side. And so there's a lot of talk about making government smaller. NASA is always an easy target because it feels frivolous to a lot of people. It feels like it's money that's just sort of being spent on fun and games. But it's great technology. A lot of those technologies make their way into private industry. And you're right. This is a way that money goes into private companies so that they can build these great rockets and move humanity forward. So we'll see whether NASA shrinks or grows. It's really unclear. And like all things with the Trump presidency, it's just very hard to anticipate what exactly is going to happen.
Oh, you probably have some errands to run a little bit today.
Always.
And you're on a mission, you've got things to do and a certain amount of time to get them done in, and then this happens.
It is interesting to me that if someone is walking slow in front of me, I'm like, oh, this person's the most annoying person in the world. And if someone is walking beside me at the same pace, I also think they're annoying. And if someone were to pass by me on my left because they're walking faster than me, I'd be like, whoa, slow it down a bit, big guy.
Oh, this is so. Basically, he's just annoyed walking on the sidewalk.
That's really funny.
Does it bother you when someone is walking slow? If they cut you off? If they pass you? Okay, here's one. How about when you park your car and somebody parks right beside you?
Yeah.
But it's an open lot and they had dozens of other spaces to choose from.
Yeah.
Are there things that happen in public that really frustrate you? Before you two weigh in, I want to give everybody a chance at home to weigh in. Here's our WhatsApp poll. You can scan the QR code there and weigh in. What annoys you in public? There's some options to choose from there, including parking etiquette, slow walkers, or phone walkers. Kelsey, I'm curious.
Walkers.
What annoys you in public?
Well, it was funny. Our writer, Ashley, this morning phrased it so well where she's like, technically it is a public space, but we all have like interior rules for people in public settings, which is just so ridiculous when you phrase it that way. For me, it's people who leave a mess. Like, it's a public space.
Good one,
Pick up after yourself. I talk a lot about the sport teams that I manage and we work with, and I was in the booth for the hockey team on Sunday because I set up the board where the times run. And I go in and there's like, someone's left like cold concession fries. So they're like gross and old. And then there's like a heater box, which I looked at and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea to bring a space heater into the box because it's cold.
Yeah.
But like, take your garbage with you when you leave.
Yeah.
The heater wasn't there, just the box that came in. Oh, it's so annoying. Like, it's not my job to clean up after you. I clean up after all the people in my house
Did you
already.
end up cleaning it up?
Like, no, I just left it.
Oh, you did?
I did. I'm so irritated. I know. Maybe I should have cleaned it up. I don't know. But I just pick up after yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had that conversation over the Christmas holiday, and you were getting ready to launch the kids. And there's, 25 people or whatever in the house at my sister's. And she came downstairs. She's like, camp rules, everybody. If everybody just takes care of themselves, clean up after their own mess, it just makes it easier for the whole thing to run.
Yes. Yes.
This is what we tell our kids.
They put in a new lane in, like, I'd take a specific route home, and they've put in this lane now that one lane is for straight and left, and then the other lane is for right. But the way that it's positioned, people go,
Yes,
there's
I know the one
two
you're talking
lanes
about.
now. One is for right turn lane, but people think that's still the straight lane.
Yes.
Oh, they're trying to merge in?
Do you lay on the horn?
Yes, I do. They're in Toronto. If you've driven in Toronto, or really, I'm not sure if it's like this in other big cities across the country, but when there's so much construction, they just decide to change the way the lanes are formed.
Yes.
Right? So if you notice, in Toronto at least, there's a part of Avenue Road where nobody can figure out what to do because the old lane you can kind of see.
Oh, I hate that.
I know. And then the new lane they've done, but everyone, I think, if you haven't driven it, you don't know, and it's very confusing. I don't know. It's like one of those things that's so out of my control. But it really bothers me when people aren't looking at the new directions on the road.
Yes.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it makes me angry. I'm also angry at the new speed cameras, 100%. Those keep rolling in
We know.
Oh,
We hear about it a lot.
I know. And you brought up, so Mel Robbins recently has launched this new book, and this idea of let them. Where you're just gonna like let people deal with their annoyances and you're not gonna try and fix them. And so I'm trying to channel that so bad.
Me too.
How's that working for both of you? Both of you seem more frustrated by letting it go or letting them.
I'm not okay with the let them theory with these speed cameras, because the Canada Post strike, now I'm getting all of them. And I didn't even, yeah, every day.
Let them.
No.
Let them mail it to you.
No, I don't want to.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
For more great conversations, download or hit subscribe to Your Morning, the podcast, on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget, watch us live weekday mornings on CTV CTV News Channel or on your CTV News app. Start your morning with us.